Good evening. I'm Jennifer Rabb, and I have the great privilege of serving as president of Hunter College, where the American dream continues to come true on campus and online as it has in the 150 years since our founding. As we know, keeping this American dream alive and well throughout the city we call home requires us to participate in the crucial task of choosing tomorrow's leaders. And this spring, following a year like no other in our history, we have a precious opportunity before us to look with hope to the future and select the men and women best equipped to take us from lockdown back to life, from pandemic to prosperity. To help us make the best choices to get us there, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first in a series of Hunter College Roosevelt House campaign forums. These forums are designed to introduce and engage candidates for public office in this year's vitally important municipal elections, with a special focus on the down-ballot races that sometimes get less attention than the contests for mayor and comptroller. And what better place to engage the candidates on priority issues than at Roosevelt House, which has been the scene of some pretty lively discussion and debates over the years, not only between nominees for public office, but between one-time residents Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt, too. It was at Roosevelt House that they together worked through some of the issues that tested our survival as a society and invented some of the programs that helped lift the nation from its knees in the 1930s. So even as we turn our attention to modern day campaigns and challenges, we pause to remember Eleanor, who spoke up for civil rights, human rights, and women's rights when only a few pioneers were in her corner. And of course, FDR, who ran 2 successful campaigns for governor of New York, as well as his first triumphant race for the presidency. All from Roosevelt House. What a history, and what a challenge to live up to their aspirations for New York and the nation. This evening, we begin our series with the candidates for the Democratic nomination for Manhattan Borough President, asking them to explore some of their own policy priorities for 2021. After 8 years of strong leadership from our great friend Gail Brewer, voters must now elect a new Manhattan Borough President to help guide this borough and our entire city back from one of the most challenging periods in its history. The winner will inherit the unique opportunity, as well as the awesome challenge, of helping to manage our recovery while amplifying the crucial concerns of Manhattan residents. As holder of the borough's top office, he or she will become a vital resource and respected voice for hundreds of thousands of residents, influencing key decisions at the highest level of city government and at the core levels of every community and neighborhood. Our Hunter students come from every corner of every borough and beyond, but as a community, we all converge and convene at our Manhattan campus. And when we all get back here, we will share a vested interest in the plans and priorities of our next Manhattan Borough President. Candidates, Hunter has been fortunate to enjoy wonderful relationships with the presidents of our borough, from Scott Stringer and C. Virginia Fields back to Ruth Messenger, who continues to teach for the leaders of tomorrow at Hunter's classes today. In keeping with our historic motto, Mihi Cura Futuri, the care of the future is mine, we look forward to working alongside the next Manhattan Borough President to care for the future of our hometown and borough. Of course, the future in large part belongs to our Hunter students, and tonight's candidate forum will turn the spotlight on the questions they have prepared for this discussion. I know we will all benefit from hearing and addressing their concerns. And now, please join me in welcoming the candidates to this virtual Roosevelt House stage. In reverse alphabetical order, they are Kimberly Watkins, President of the Community Education Council for District 3 on the Upper West Side; Mark Levine, the City Council member for District 7 in Northern Manhattan; Ben Kalos, City Council member representing our Upper East Side. Brad Hoylman, State Senator from the 27th District covering much of Midtown Manhattan. Elizabeth Caputo, former chair of Community Board 7 on the Upper West Side. And Lindsay Boylan, former Deputy Secretary to the Governor for Economic Development. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to a lively and penetrating discussion. I could not be more pleased to welcome as this evening's moderator, journalist Rachel Holiday Smith, the Manhattan reporter for The City, New York's independent nonprofit local newsroom. In more than a decade covering local news, Rachel has worked as a producer for Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and New York One. Her writing has appeared in publications including The Times, Crain's, The Gotham Gazette, and City Limits. Rachel, we are grateful for the city's presence as a voice in covering New York's local issues with insight and clarity. And we so appreciate your leading tonight's forum. You are the perfect choice, not only because you know Manhattan so well and its issues, but because you too were once the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper at NYU. Rachel, thank you for leading tonight's forum and working so closely with our students. Please take it away, Rachel.
Thank you so much, President Rob. And yes, that's right. I was once a student in Manhattan with lots of questions for lots of folks in elected office. So we're actually going to hear mostly from students tonight who have really good questions for the candidates. And I'll be just here to guide and timekeep and keep us on track, but we're really going to get to the substantive issues from them. So let's begin with opening statements. So how this will work is we're going to hear from each candidate with an opening statement with 1 minute on the clock, and then we'll get into some questions. Then they'll have 2 minutes to respond to each of those questions. So let's hear first from Kimberly Watkins. You've got 1 minute to introduce yourself to the folks listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And hello, everybody. It's so great to be here. My candidacy for borough president was born out of my extreme frustrations with the New York City public school system, with its governance, with policy making, and ultimately the disconnect between decision making in City Hall, Albany, and Tweed, and the reality of what was happening, what is happening in our schools with our students, our parents, our teachers, and our school nurses. I am the president of CEC3, which is the most segregated school district in the most segregated school system in the entire country. And over the last 6 years, my colleagues and I have managed to pass 2 of the city's most progressive moves to integrate and improve schools in Harlem and the Upper West Side, the schools that comprise District 3. As your next borough president, I will take my passion for, thank you, and competencies to do this work for kids and apply it to Manhattan's biggest issues of affordability, sustainability, and responsible government. I'm so looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Okay, thank you so much. And as you saw, we've got that time clock on the screen, so it'll just gently remind you when you're at time. And then I'll gently remind you if you don't see it. Okay, so we're going to hear next from Councilmember Mark Levine.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you to all the students in Roosevelt House for caring about the future of this borough and for stepping up to lead. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my own background. I started my career after having studied physics in college, and I became a bilingual math and science teacher in the South Bronx. I went on to start a community development credit union in Washington Heights that's now made $25 million in microloans uptown, helping families do everything from buy their first home computer to start a small business. I'm honored now to have been elected twice in the 7th Council District, one of the most diverse in the city. It covers a little bit of the West Side, Washington Heights, West Harlem. I live uptown in the Heights with my family, my wife and our 2 boys, both public school students, 1 high school and 1 CUNY at City College. I'm pleased now to be chairing the Health Committee and running for Manhattan Borough President to fight for this city, for this borough, for our communities to come back stronger, healthier, and more just. Very much looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hear next from Elizabeth Caputo. You were chosen next in the lineup. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. So look, I am a proud public school graduate. I'm a working woman. I lead our US engagement at the World Economic Forum here in Manhattan. I'm the daughter of 2 public educators. One of them was actually the former president of Hunter College. So I'm very, very proud of the work of Hunter and all the work that has been going on with all of you over the years. I've lived and worked in Manhattan for 25 years, the last 10 with my partner Jose and our dogs Leo and Bruno. My mission for Manhattan Borough President is very simple. We have to save our neighborhoods. We're going to do that by making the borough more affordable, by helping small businesses, by getting students back to school in person, and addressing quality of life issues, including transit and the stop where you all know very well at 68th and Lex. I also just want to say that we need more women in elected office. That's what Roosevelt House is about. It was a living memorial to her legacy, and I'm committed to that during my time as your borough president. Thank you, and I look forward to discussing these issues with you tonight.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Ben Kalos. You've got 1 minute on the clock.
Hi, I'm Councilmember Ben Kalos. I'm co-chair of the Progressive Caucus in the City Council, and I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because everywhere else in America, people struggle to get out. But here in New York City, we struggle to stay, and together I believe we can fix that. I grew up right here in Manhattan. I graduated from the Bronx High School of Science and the State University of New York. And I have student debt that I won't be done paying off until I retire. Living with a single mom, sharing a room with her, living with my grandparents who fled anti-Semitism, I was on free and reduced school lunch, and I was so ashamed for other kids to know how poor I was that I didn't eat. That's why I fought to make school lunch free and want to feed every single child dinner as part of universal after school. And as a new parent, I know we can make it easier to raise a family here by providing universal child care. It's so hard to live here because of developers who get a lot in tax breaks from corrupt politicians, never taking money from real estate developers. And I want a city where all of us can afford to live.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Lindsay Boylan. Got 1 minute
Thank you
for an opening.
Thank you. Eleanor Roosevelt was the first badass woman in my life, and Frances Perkins, first female in the cabinet. Pretty amazing to be here. I'm Lindsay Boylan. I'm a career urban planner, and I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because right now we need a bold progressive with proven executive experience to make our city more equitable, livable, and sustainable for all New Yorkers. Our city is in crisis. The pandemic is still raging, with Black and Latinx communities hit the hardest. Rent is out of control, and our police force, our government, and our elected leaders aren't accountable to us. We've failed to meet this moment of racial reckoning. Our public transportation is not accessible, and we have no real plan for addressing climate change. It's not just that we can do better, it's that we must do better. I'm not afraid to speak truth to power, and I will be the bold, progressive leader who will fight to make sure that no one is left behind and that we recover together from this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we have one more person who is supposed to be here tonight. That's State Senator Brad Hoylman. It is my understanding that he is wrapped up with Albany issues with the state budget. So we will be waiting for him to join, and we'll catch up with him when he can get here. But we're going to move ahead to question 1, which is from Harrison Cade, a student who is joining us, and I will ask him to come onto the screen. There he is. So Harrison, welcome. And please go ahead with your question. And I just want to say before you ask, we're going to rotate the answers. So Councilmember Levine, you're going to go first on this one. So you'll have 2 minutes after Harrison's done asking his question. Go ahead.
First, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My name is Harrison Cade. I'm a senior at Hunter College. I am a former Grow Fellow and a current public service scholar. And I had the great fortune of interning under Gail Brewer 2 years ago. My question is this: as we move further into the Biden era, there is a renewed sense that we can work toward creating more equitable and compassionate government. How will you use your position as the borough president to restore confidence in our government among Latino communities and all communities of color in Manhattan?
Well, thank you so much, Harrison. It seems like a significant portion of the population of Manhattan interned for Gail Brewer once. It's just one piece of her incredible legacy. She really has been an amazing leader. And thank you for bringing up the challenges of inequality, which have been very much revealed and exacerbated over this past year. equalities in every sector of our society, obviously in healthcare and access to medical care, but also inequality in patterns of housing, employment, criminal justice, education. We cannot ignore this anymore. And I will work as borough president to address it on every front, starting with the imperative that we recover from this pandemic in a way that finally addresses the inequality of access to healthcare. Worked very hard on legislation to bring undocumented immigrants full access to primary care in New York City. This is the kind of thing we need to make sure we don't see inequality in future public health crisis. We have an urgent need to address the challenge of affordable housing and to protect vulnerable tenants. Those are crises which disproportionately impact Black and brown communities in Manhattan and citywide. I have been and will continue to be extremely aggressive in fighting to protect tenants. I'm proud to have authored historic legislation making New York City the first place in America to establish right to counsel for tenants in housing court. It was a 3-year organizing campaign that I led. We defeated the landlord lobby. We need to go even further to expand it ahead of the post-pandemic surge in evictions. But this is also critical for equity for low-income Manhattanites. And in the education space, I do want to credit Kim and the leaders in District 3 and other parts of the borough for standing up against segregation and putting forth concrete, workable solutions that will create more integrated schools at all levels, something I'm deeply committed to as a former teacher, as a public school parent, and something I'll fight for as borough president. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go next to Elizabeth Caputo. Same question for you. How would you use your position to restore confidence in the local government from communities of color in Manhattan?
Sure, thanks. And I think it's really important to also focus on what the borough president actually does, which I know we'll get into at some point tonight. You know, there are really 3 core responsibilities of the borough president. One is using the bully pulpit. I think each one of us in this race will show leadership to make sure we are making sure that the communities that are underrepresented in Manhattan are represented and fight for that and use that bully pulpit as a leadership role. That is a critical component of the borough president's job. The second one is really on land use and development. And we need to look, you know, in the weeds on how ULURP is being done, how affordable housing is getting done. The borough president has a key role in zoning. There needs to be more public transparency and participation in that process, which includes involving people from every neighborhood in Manhattan. Public spaces that don't serve everyone are no good. We don't want to cut off airspace, the environment. We want to get the best results by including everyone, and that includes everyone in the communities all over Manhattan. And then the third piece, which is where I really come in, having been, I think, the only person on this call who's chaired a community board, is really making sure the management of those boards includes all voices. And that means going into communities that are underserved and making sure in Manhattan, the borough president is not just talking the talk, but actually going into communities. I have said consistently that my office will be at 125th Street, not at 1 Center Street. That's for many reasons, because of the environmental justice issues that are required above 96th Street that have been ignored by many elected officials currently. We need to make sure that we have a borough president who's a leader, who appoints members who are diverse to community boards, and then also goes out into the community and makes sure that we are out and about every day across all parts of the borough. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Councilmember Ben Kallo. Same question to you about equity and communities of color in Manhattan.
When it comes to equity, we have to start by acknowledging that the systems of racism that everyone knew about before the pandemic continued to only hurt Black and brown communities much more than anywhere else. Black and brown New Yorkers, many of whom were essential workers, paid with their lives. And as we seek to recover, vaccinations are being distributed in the same racist ways, with communities of color not getting the same access to vaccinations. And that's a failure of leadership at every level of government. I would start by making sure that every single New Yorker, every single person in Manhattan has access to vaccines, and that we prioritize vaccinations in communities of color where they've been, the government's failed to really deliver. when it comes to it, there's 3 areas I'd like to focus on: hunger, access to actually retiring, and affordable housing. When it comes to hunger, when we pay farmers not to farm, it's not a question of resources, it's a question of information. That's why I've been working on automatic benefits or barrier-free benefits. We worked on it with the Obama administration. I secured $5 million to study it in Northern Manhattan. And I basically want to say, if we take your tax information and automatically give you whatever you need to cure hunger, it is something we were doing at CUNY by bringing food pantries and a benefit assist program to CUNY campuses, because the reality is CUNY students need food assistance. In terms of retirements, most New Yorkers don't have a retirement account. I know you're in college and it seems like it's pretty far off, but people of color rarely have retirement savings. And that's why I'm working with the Biden administration on retirement security for all. Last but not least, affordable housing. And I will get to talk about this at some point later.
Yes, that's true. Okay, we're going to move on now to Lindsay Boylan. Same question about how you'd use your office to promote equity among communities of color in Manhattan.
And this is the job to do it in. This is an urban planning job. All of the tools are about urban planning, land use, zoning, community boards, CapEx in our communities, capital investment. And I've spent my whole career in urban planning. So I'll have about $100 million, give or take, depending on budget, to spend in our communities. And that is going to come at the discretion of and at the direction of our communities that have been most left out of every part of the planning process. As someone who started her career in urban planning, the first thing I really learned about it is that it's inherently and historically racist. And it's no surprise that the 2 waste management treatment plants in Manhattan are in predominantly low-income communities of color uptown. We have historically put things we don't want away from white communities, wealthier white communities, and people who have been left out of the process need to be closest to the opportunity. I think also it has to be said, I spent my whole day waiting to speak out at a landmarks committee meeting today, and my team tried to do that too for 9 hours. Totally inaccessible system to participate in our democracy. Imagine stacking on top of that needing secondary language when almost half of our households speak a different language at home. We need to make our government truly accessible. We need to invest first and foremost in our communities of color, which have been disinvested in as a policy stance. And we need to particularly focus on the environment and housing issues, because those 2 issues of extreme inequality, as exemplified by housing and the environment, are some of the greatest issues we're going to have in this city. And I'm excited to do it as the only person who spent her career in urban planning in this race.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we would have been going with Brad Hoylman, but he is not here yet. I don't see him. So we will move on to Kimberly Watkins. Same question to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, I want to start by talking about how the vector of the public school system really is the intersectional piece that is really left out in terms of many of the conversations that go on at the borough president's level, where I think we could do a lot of, make a lot of progress, is to elevate the spirit of governance of the public school system by working as a city to dismantle mayoral control as a governance structure for the public school system, and then bringing the elected leaders of our school system, where no other locality, very few other localities around the country even have the kind of structure that we have. Elected leaders of our districts in Manhattan, all 6 of those leaders would be part of the borough board operation, would be able to help integrate a stronger sense of community within decisions that are made within neighborhoods, because elected leaders, so the school system manages to propagate leaders within PTAs at various schools and up through the rankings into the CECs and our president's councils, et cetera. But we then leave them basically to hang and really don't help them make a bridge to getting making changes for the public school system because of mayoral control. So that's the first thing that I would want to focus on. The second thing that I would really want to focus on is our students. In District 3, the other thing that we've done over the last couple of years is create a concept similar to Model United Nations, but we call it Model CEC. And that is taking middle school student voice and really bringing it to the forefront, working alongside and bringing in people, high school students like Teens Takes Charge and Integrate NYC, and helping young people really drive the inclusion and the sort of next level thinking when it comes to making sure that we have equity and justice embedded within the work of the Borough President's Office. And that is what I will do.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you all for sticking to time. I really appreciate that. It makes it all so much easier. So we are going to move on to question 2 from another student. And I will introduce now Fiona Crisp, who has our second question. Hi, Fiona.
Hi.
And
Hi,
you can, and I'm just going to say that Elizabeth, you're going to go first on this question after Fiona is done asking it. So go ahead, Fiona.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Fiona Crisp. I'm a senior at Hunter College. I'm majoring in environmental science. I'm a Grove Fellow at Roosevelt House, and I'm also a former Gale Brewer intern. My question is, how will you ensure that Manhattan's most vulnerable neighborhoods, not just the Wall Street area, will be protected from the devastating effects of sea level rise? And for my classmate, Chloe Muller, who could not make it tonight, how do you plan to create a more sustainable and resilient New York City in the fight against climate change?
Thanks so much, and it's a great question. I also want to acknowledge we actually have 2 of our forum or our colleagues here at our campaign who are former Gale interns as well. So she has a very far reach, and I've been very proud to work with her during my time as a community board chair. Look, when it comes to the environment and resilience, it's absolutely 100% something we need to be focused on, not just downtown, but throughout all parts of Manhattan. I've said a few things. One is that I support a Green New Deal. I care about that because it's important. It's also something that is going to be focused on jobs, that puts people, and especially young people, the students who are on this call, it will put people to work. It will involve upgrading our city infrastructure. I am I think the only candidate in this race who has worked between the public and private and the global and local, and I see how other cities around the world are rebuilding back better. And we need the type of leader in this job who can do that. I've been a municipal infrastructure finance expert. I believe that reinventing our city infrastructure when it comes to rebuilding and making things more resilient will generate long-term savings, both in energy efficiency and resilience against the impacts of climate change. I also have been the only candidate to call for what I call a core of the Big Apple, and that's CORPS of the Big Apple, even though Manhattan is the core, CORE of the Big Apple, the core of the Big Apple, which is a program that can inspire and bring motivated young people back to work with the support of subsidized housing. Those are the types of big ideas this office can do and that I want to do. So I'm particularly inspired by the CUNY Service Corps program that I know many of you are familiar with. That's going to create thousands of good jobs for New Yorkers and help bring our city back. It's also going to save the city millions of dollars in landfill and waste costs and avoid the tragedy in the recovery process of climate change-borne natural disasters in the future. So those are just some of my ideas, and I'd welcome any chance to talk to you more about them in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll hear from Councilmember Ben Kallos now. Same question from Fiona.
Hi, Fiona. Thanks for the great question. Thank you for focusing on our environment. We have a climate emergency. The polarized caps aren't melting, they've melted. Our planet is literally burning. You can ask anyone in California. And that's why I actually authored the Declaration of Climate Emergency and passed it here in New York City, making us the largest city on the planet to do so. Not only that, but I, as co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, helped pass their dirty buildings legislation here in the city, Local Law 97. That's why I got the endorsement of our environmental chair, Costa Constantinides, and even the creator of Captain Planet, if you've ever watched that show. And when the city council actually tried to start gutting that law, and colleagues on this call actually voted in favor of allowing natural gas exemptions, I actually voted against them. And I'll be moving forward with trying to ban natural gas in new building construction here in the city so we can transition away from fossil fuels. When it comes to resiliency, I've actually secured $874 million for the Upper East Side and East Harlem, which is an environmental justice community, which is in a flood zone. And as Borough President, I've actually done the work, and I'll keep doing the work and make sure that we actually build resilient waterfronts around the entire Manhattan, and also offer additional parks. You can learn more about my ideas for the environment at kalos.nyc/fresh ideas. I yield the rest of my time.
All right. All right. We'll hear from Lindsay Boylan next. And I just want to pause for 1 second because we did have a message in the chat. People are wondering where Brad Hoylman is. For people who joined late, and there are some folks who this Zoom has gotten bigger since we joined. He is in Albany tonight, so we will catch up with him when he joins the Zoom from Albany. So Lindsay, I'm sorry to pause there, but
No problem.
go ahead,
No problem.
2 minutes to you.
Well, thank you, Fiona. I think I am the youngest person in this race, but if I'd been a few years younger, instead of being an urban planning professional, I would be an environmental professional. I've spent a lot of my career thinking about these issues. Hurricane Katrina sent me into the field. I oversaw the state's recovery work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. I also oversaw the state's Office of Storm Recovery, which continues to administer Sandy funds. That matters because I'm the one in this race with the experience actually managing issues around the climate crisis. And what do we know about those issues? They affect our most vulnerable communities the most. We see that in the global refugee crisis that we have as well. What do I see in Manhattan especially? We have a bunch of agencies that don't work together. NYCHA, separate from DOT, separate from Con Edison, separate from all the different agencies that are supposed to be spending money and thinking about how to care for Manhattanites better. And that means it's not going well. I have been, my first early endorsers were in East River Park supporters in Lower Manhattan, the Lower East Side, because they said, hey, this woman gets it and she's going to be on our side and she's going to bring these different agencies together, because that's something that you can do with the bully pulpit of the Manhattan Borough President's Office. And I've already done it. I did it interagency, managing several different agencies at the state level. I would also say that our biggest challenges are around two things: housing and buildings envelopes in the city. They're not nearly as environmentally efficient as they should be. We're moving in the right direction, hopefully, with congestion pricing. Our public transit system is really subpar. It's not mobility enhanced. Good, 3/4 of our subways don't have elevators that operate. We have not made it possible for people to live in an environmentally conscious way. It's too expensive and it's too hard. And one of my big jobs will be to change that and help change that in every way, from housing to transit. And I'm really excited about this work. I've been doing it my whole career. And of course, we see, again, like in every issue, in the environmental issues, climate crisis, people who are closest to the pain should be closest to the solutions, and people who are closest to the pain have been people who predominantly had lower incomes, communities of color, and it was designed that way. Flood zones throughout Manhattan correlate to those same issues. And that's why the first communities that I'm going to be working hand in hand with and ensuring that there's no fall off between agencies and spending and planning is why I'm going to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to hear from Kimberly Watkins now, and then followed by Mark Levine. And I just want to say to Fiona, not to put you on the spot, but if you have any like specific follow-up questions for the candidates, if something comes to you, we might have a little time for that. So, okay, Kim, go ahead.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for calling me Kim too. Every time you say Kimberly, I'm thinking, I'm in trouble from my mom.
Noted.
So a couple of things. I want to echo a couple of things that Lindsay just said, because one of the things that I think is really striking about the way that the government operates right now is that it really isn't very operable. The interagency kind of conundrum is basically a big waste of money. And for a city that has $105 billion budget that we spend every year, it's really extraordinary that we haven't managed to take pains to, for example, put elevators in our subway stops, make sure that there are greenways around the entire borough so that people can safely move about without resorting to cars and buses, et cetera. So I think that that elevation, the bully pulpit that the borough president has, is absolutely the keen way to go about making sure people understand how inefficient we've been making policy across climate, the variety of climate issues that we face in New York City, which of course we know we face a ton. The other thing that I wanted to say is I think also with respect to spending and capital spending, I think there is an opportunity because I think our young people really have a finger on the pulse of policy changes and habit forming changes that we as adults have been ignoring for our adult lives, is participatory budgeting at the borough level. There's a great sense of this in our city council districts. It is definitely something that we should be considering at the borough president's level. And that allows younger residents to participate in how we spend capital funds. And that is an educational component to it, of course, but that kind of ties that loop and helps us move forward as a city.
Thank you. Councilmember Levine.
Thank you so much, and great to see Brad has joined us. We know he has a busy night up there in Albany. Looking forward to hearing the updates. It sounds like there's lots of good news. So I have been deeply devoted to the cause of environmentalism in my entire tenure in the city council. I'm proud to have received a 100% rating yet again this year from the New York League of Conservation Voters for my work as chair of the Parks Committee, as chair of the Health Committee, and for a variety of legislation I've been proud to sponsor and pass to advance the environmental cause, which I'll talk about if we have time. I've been proud to work extremely closely with and to vote in lockstep with the amazing chair of the City Council's Environmental Committee, Costa Constantinidis, with voting with him both to pass the historic Climate Mobilization Act and in the subsequent bills on that topic. And this really is big. It puts New York City ahead of the world in not just suggesting or incentivizing, but mandating that large buildings reduce their use of greenhouse gases by 40% by 2030, by 80% by 2050, with stiff fines that take effect in a few years. This is going to be a big, complicated, multi-year implementation. The next borough president is going to have to work on this intensely to make sure that it achieves its goals. But we also need to do more in transportation, which is also a major source of greenhouse gases in this city. We need to move much more quickly to electrify the city's vehicle fleet, for sure. We need to do much more to get people out of private cars and into mass transit. And finally, while we fight climate change, we have to advance resiliency here because the change has already arrived. And that means protecting coastal areas, preventing flooding, creating more storm runoff in parks, in street trees, on green roofs. There's much we have to do to protect us from the climate change that is already here while we fight to save our planet for the future. Thank you so much, Fiona.
Thank you. And we're going to skip around a little bit to get State Senator Hoylman into the conversation. So I just want to briefly let him respond to the first question that we had from Harrison. And State Senator, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's
it's
okay.
the craziest thing. Hi, everyone. Hello, colleagues. I'm
Hello.
in Albany.
You are breaking up quite a bit. I don't know if we can hear you so well. Yep.
I am trying to find a location.
Okay, we're hearing that you're trying to find a spot to talk to us. So why don't you do that? We're going to move on for now,
Okay.
but when you get to a spot where you have good reception, we'll bring you in. So Fiona, I just wanted to ask, is there anything that the candidate said you just wanted to follow up individually with them with, or if there's nothing,
Can you
that's
hear me
okay
now?
too. Oh,
Hi, I had to find a location because I'm in the camp.
we're getting transmissions intermittently from Albany. State Senator, I don't hear you now, so I'm just going to keep moving on. Okay. Anyone else hear him? I don't think I hear him, right? Yeah, okay, we're getting no's on that. So Fiona, is there any last questions you had? Any last thoughts?
No, just thank you all for answering my question and all for all the work that you do for New York City.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to move on to question 3, and we will rope in State Senator Brad Hoylman when we get him. But we're going to hear now from Ishrat Jahan, another student who has a great question about policing. Ishrat, thank you for being here. Oh, and I just want to say, sorry, I have to go back. Councilmember Kalos will be the first person to respond to this question. We're trying to rotate the order. So Ishrat, go ahead with your question.
Okay, got it. Hi, thank you all for coming. My name is Ishrat and I'm a current human biology major at Hunter, and I am a current Grove Fellow. My question is, many subway stations, especially those in predominantly BIPOC neighborhoods, have faced issues of over-policing. How will you and your team address this issue? Can we redirect the funds for police and stations to much-needed improvement in transportation infrastructure, or should we maintain the amount of policing? If so, why?
Thank you, Ishrat, for bringing up this topic. We can't have a meaningful recovery unless we center it on criminal justice reform, unless we actually have a mayor that's willing to fire a police commissioner for the kinds of things that our commissioner has done, and this commissioner must be fired. I'm the only one on this panel in this forum who has voted to defund the NYPD and will continue to say it. We need to, and I voted to, pull at least $1 billion, not through parlor tricks, not by lying to voters and thinking that we can outsmart them, but by actually meaningfully reinvesting that $1 billion in places that police have no business. That means pulling police out of schools. That means pulling police off mental health response, pulling police out of homeless services, pulling them out of our parks because they shouldn't be interacting with our children. And so with that $1 billion, we can do it. We could actually go further. We also need to demilitarize the police. That's why I've been going after contracts with war machines and tanks that the NYPD has been buying, and why I've introduced legislation to ban the NYPD from weaponizing robots. I don't know if you saw Black Mirror or the robot dog that they've been using up in the Bronx, but they have no place. Similarly, we should be investing in our transit. We need more than $1 billion from that. We need several $1 billion. That's why I support congestion pricing and actually have a bold plan to go bigger than just tolling 60th Street. There's so much we can do, but it starts with rethinking policing in our city and investing in communities that have been harmed by over-policing. Thank you, and I'll yield my time.
Okay, thank you so much. Next, we will go to Lindsay Boylan, the same question.
Sure. Just to clarify, there, when the city councilman talks about being the only one to support defunding the police, that's on the city council. I also support the defunding effort and movement completely. There are only 2 people in this race who had that opportunity to vote on that. So just want to set that aside. When they talked about hiring 500 additional transit police, for instance, I think exactly to your question, Ishrat, I responded by saying, why don't we hire 500 social workers? Because social workers connect the dots in communities. They don't simply work for one aspect of a problem. They connect people to housing. They connect people to important resources. And we need 500 more social workers. We do not need 500 more cops. I'm fully supportive of the defund the police movement. We need to redirect many of the roles of the police department into things like mental health services, not managed by the police, who are not best in that role. And I think for far too long, we've been driven by this fear that says if we over police communities of color, that will prevent all the problems. And instead it creates the problems. We need to invest in communities of color, and it doesn't happen just by investing in the police. So I'm fully supportive of defunding, fully supportive of hiring more social workers instead of more cops. And what a world's difference we would have right now if we had 500 additional social workers who are empowered to do the work that we need them to do in this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's make another attempt to bring in State Senator Hoylman. All right, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes,
You have no
we can.
idea. You have no idea where I am. I'm in the far reaches of the Albany Capitol complex, non-governmental property, on the floor, trying to avoid the folks who are trying to mop the floor. So anyhow,
Okay.
that's
well,
my life.
Okay.
It's good to see everyone.
Good to see you as well. Glad you could be here. So right now we have a question, and I don't know if you heard it, but it's from a student we have with us, Ishrat. And Ishrat, I'm just going to read your question if that's okay. Could you answer the question about BIPOC neighborhoods facing over-policing, especially in subway stations? How will you and your team address this issue? And can we redirect the funds for police in stations to much needed improvements in transportation infrastructure? Or should we maintain the amount of policing?
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Ishra. And it's good to see all my colleagues here. You know, I really do believe that we need to rethink where funding goes. The first person on the scene of when there's a constituent of mine who calls regarding a homeless individual in distress is often a cop, and that's not the way it should be. We can redirect funds within the NYPD and make certain that folks with the appropriate training and background work with the NYPD, even wear the badge, but are not militarized and are able to respond in a way that is appropriate for so many of the calls that our police are required to answer, but yet in many instances are not trained or skilled to deal with. I do want to mention the fact that I'm very sensitive to the issue of communities of color and over policing. We were very fortunate this year in this legislative session, which I'm still working on here, as you can see, to pass the end of the so-called walking while trans ban. Ishrat, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a statute in the penal law that for 3 decades had criminalized very innocent behavior. Basically, standing out on a street corner, wearing a short skirt and cowboy boots and a tank top might get you arrested for essentially loitering, as they called it in the statute, for the disproportionately impacted women, particularly transgender women and women of color. So I fought to end that unfair policing that existed, and I'm very proud of that. But I think it's important that community boards, in order to work with the borough president, are reflective of the borough. And that's something I think we can do better in terms of appointing members who are really the eyes and ears for the borough. Latinos, we need more Asian Americans, we need more transgender folks. And that's another way that the borough president can be attuned to these concerns about over-policing in communities of color. Thank you. If you hear mopping, that's not me.
Thank you. Kim, we're going to go to you next. Same question, and you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, Ishrat. This is a really great question. It's a really sensitive question, and I think I'm probably the only person that served as a volunteer for the NYPD as an auxiliary police officer on this panel, and I did that for many years on the Upper West Side, and I very, very much support the strength of community safety, and I'm troubled by the division that we've sowed through the dramatic change in the quality of living for so many people in our city over the last 14 to 18 months, where it is not necessarily safe to go out on the street in my neighborhood where I live in Harlem at night anymore. It really is different now. It is not necessarily safe to be on the subway right now. And so while I certainly agree with my colleagues about centering police work around criminal justice and reform and shifting of priorities in terms of making sure that we pull police out of our school system, that we reprioritize the first response to incidents in our city, there is a real concern that we are experiencing a level of criminal behavior that is a function of the desperation that people are feeling and the economic injustice that people are experiencing as a part of our current the current crises, the pandemic and everything that's happened in our city. So we have to strike a balance between safety and between criminal justice and reforming the NYPD. It can be done, but it's definitely going to take a really strong sense of engagement and really strong leaders in order to put forth solutions that are going to work for everyone.
Thank you. Councilmember Levine, Ishrat's question to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Ishrat, for this extremely important question. Policing has crept into sectors of life here that should first and foremost be the domain of social service workers, from homeless response, addiction response, overdose response, mental health response. And we need to fix that. That should not first and foremost be the type of crisis that we send police into. We need more accountability for police misconduct so that officers who commit fireable offenses actually are fired. That has not been happening historically in the city. And we're making some progress on those fronts, and we have so much more to do. You see the failings in the subways, where New Yorkers experiencing homelessness have not been given adequate social services. They are themselves actually more likely to be victims of crime. And many of them are seeking refuge in the subway system because they feel unsafe in our shelter system. That's another failing of local government. We have made progress on homeless response in the budget that we passed last year. The NYPD unit for homeless response has been disbanded. Those officers have been dispersed. But we still have more work to do on mental health response and overdose response. We just recently passed legislation that's really historic that will eliminate qualified immunity for police officers and the police department in New York City. This really is an important advance in American history, undoing pre-civil rights era laws that made it very difficult for people to sue the police. And we also achieved other important victories in that budget last year, which if we have time to talk about, I'll get into, including restoring CUNY ASAP funding, restoring money for summer youth employment, restoring much needed funds for food pantries. And so I am proud to have fought for and delivered those kind of resources for my district in Uptown Manhattan, Washington Heights, West Harlem, that so desperately have needed support over the past year. I will continue to fight for the resources my community needs. I'll continue to fight for fair policing, for accountability, for the good of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we're going to hear from Elizabeth Caputo.
Thanks so much. So look, I believe in a lot of what everyone has said through this conversation. It's a really important subject, and thank you, Ishrat, for mentioning it. Look, I believe in reforming and redirecting funds for the police. They need to be reallocated to non-policing forms of public safety. I think we can all agree that there is a public safety crisis that has happened in this city. We have real neighborhood quality of life issues that are going on in the city. And we also need to recognize that part of that is that we just haven't had the local leadership that we deserve here in New York City. And we need real leaders who can step up and provide the social services, healthcare, and community resources, really neighborhood by neighborhood, that these people deserve. When it comes to transportation, I believe that part of the allocation of resources also could be better directed at investments in transportation that will allow everyone to travel equitably around the city. I do this in my day job, where I look at how cities are looking at equitable forms of transportation around the world. And to me, when it comes to BIPOC neighborhoods and BIPOC neighborhoods, we've hosted, one of the things I did as a community board chair was we brought the head of the 2-0 and the 2-4 precincts to our community board meetings every month. That had a huge impact on how people felt about the police. It made them feel like they were part of the community. It made them understand what was going on in the community. I believe that's a model that I would like to replicate throughout the 12 community boards in Manhattan. Again, bringing it back to what neighborhoods can truly do. And then finally, when it comes to transit, I want to bring this back to the job of the borough president. We're going to have billions of dollars coming in thanks to the Biden administration and the stimulus plan that got approved. We need to make sure that that is allocated responsibly and equitably. And when it comes to transit, which I have believed consistently is the great equalizer of our city, we need to fund the Second Avenue subway. We need to make sure congestion pricing is implemented responsibly and fairly. And we need to make sure that we devote a fair amount of time to infrastructure and transportation investments. So those are some of my priorities as borough president, and I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Ishrat, thank you so much for that really important question, and thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. Okay, we're going to take just a couple of minutes to go backwards in time and get State Senator Hoylman up to speed on the first two questions that he missed. And I'll just give you a minute for each of these just so we can continue. But I do want to start with the first question that we had from a student named Harrison Cade. And again, this will just be a minute to answer this question. He asked, as we move further into the Biden era, there's a renewed sense that we can work toward creating more equitable and compassionate government. Specifically for Manhattan, he asked, how will you use your position as the borough president to restore confidence in our government among Latino communities and all communities of color? So that's Harrison's question to you. Just a minute.
Thank you, Harrison. Thank you again, Rachel, for accommodating me and my colleagues. I think it starts from the standpoint that the borough president is really the central organizing force for the borough and has a responsibility and in fact a role to do a few things. One is that the borough president, by charter mandate, is supposed to review city services. And I want to start something that I'm calling Borough Stat, where there's a dashboard for all communities to look to see what the level of policing is in their neighborhood. What's trash pickup like in their neighborhood? Is their neighborhood getting the same amount of city funding, say in arts and cultural institutions, as other neighborhoods? We see that disparity in Manhattan in particular, where some neighborhoods are enriched with so many arts and cultural institutions and other city services, and other neighborhoods just blocks away are not. So data is very important. Secondly, I'd like to say that it's about having community boards that reflect the neighborhoods themselves. We need to do some more reform on community boards. We allow lobbyists and the staffs of elected officials to serve on community boards. We need to stop that and make sure that we have boards that reflect the neighborhoods. And then third, I just announced today a net I want to pursue called the Manhattan Tenants Union. It's so important to low-income communities, communities of color, and all Manhattanites that tenants be organized in this post-pandemic world of rent, and the fact that so many of my constituents, and I know across Manhattan, are getting money judgments and eviction notices are around the corner. We have to organize our tenants and fight that, and that's the thing I'm going to do for everyone in Manhattan. Thank you for the question.
And then again, a minute on this question, which was our second question from Fiona Crisp, another student, and she asked about resiliency. She said, how will you ensure that Manhattan's most vulnerable residents, not just the Wall Street area, will be protected from the devastating effects of sea level rise? And a second related question, which is, how do you plan to best create a more sustainable and resilient New York City against climate change? And if you can do this in a minute, that'd be great, so we can move on to other questions. Thank you.
I will. And again, sorry for my colleagues, I have to sit through this. But I will say that the borough president is the planner in chief, and he or she should have expertise to assist local communities evaluate projects through the lens of environmental justice. And I want to have that expertise in my office, in environmental specific expertise to our local community boards that often, particularly in different parts of the borough, may not have experts at their fingertips. I know we didn't on my community board in the Village. Secondly, I think it's so important that we look at resiliency across the island. I know there's a project on the east side of Manhattan, but there isn't one on the west side of Manhattan. So I commit my office to working with the Army Corps of Engineers, which floated a plan for resiliency on the west side of Manhattan to be paid for by federal funds, but it was scuttled by the Trump administration. I want to restart that plan and work with local community boards and making sure that the west side, all the way up and down the island, is protected. And third, you've got to advocate for environmental issues every day. And I'm proud to have supported congestion pricing since since its first incarnation under the previous mayor.
Nearest
But
time.
up in Albany, we won it. And just wanted to say that it's those policies that should reflect the office. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on now to the next question. And bear with me because I'm going to thread a couple of questions, one from a student and two we actually have from the chat that I think are related to each other. And they touch on the theme of land use. I'm going to turn this into a land use question because I know that that's a huge theme, as you've mentioned, to the Manhattan Borough President's office. So the question we have is from Luis Taveras, who is a junior and a Thomas Hunter Honors Scholar, who is a major in clinical psychology and a double minor in women and gender studies. So their question is, how do you plan to involve residents in the decision-making process in our borough? Pretty standard question, pretty good question. I just want to add in a couple of questions to complicate that from the chat. So the first is from Donna Lipman, who says, Manhattan is being overwhelmed by moneyed super developers. We are losing light and sky and neighborhoods are being commercialized. How can you stop this overdevelopment and support New Yorkers continuing to further communities on a human scale? Okay, going to complicate it further and ask, point out a question from Stephen from the Q&A. He says, on the other side of the spectrum, he says, we seem to spend a lot of time on theoretical ideas like local control and community input, when many of us just want to see housing built. So I'd like you to respond to the question of how do you balance getting people to engage and having input, but also getting things built and building housing for a city that desperately needs it. So I'm going to start on this question with Lindsay Boylan, and then we'll move on from there. And 2 minutes for this question.
It is shocking to me, as long as I've lived here my whole adult life, how much real estate controls the city. Big real estate controls the city, and it controls the politicians on the city council, and it controls our mayor. And I think that has to change. Our entire ULURP process, our zoning contemplations are built on the assumptions that if you give enough to big developers, they'll do the right thing through mandatory inclusionary housing or all of these other incentive programs. When in reality, these programs just bake into the cake more displacement, continue the ratio of inequality, don't get us enough affordable housing or deeply affordable housing or supportive housing or senior housing, anything we need. So I totally appreciate this last piece of the question, which is, we don't want theoretical conversations around local control. I don't either. I think what we want is real, actual, genuine decision-making at the local level. I think by contrast to the Soho NoHo zoning contemplation, what I've seen that's pretty inspiring is something like the Chinatown Working Group, where a group of people said, this is what I want for my community. This is what we need. We need to downgrade commercial zoning and upzone, in essence, opportunities for real estate, for residential, so that we don't just have a bunch of hotels, which is what we have too much of. And that's a sign that we have real estate run amok, because our incentives have created such that, real estate, big developers get to make money off of commercial development or luxury development at the expense of any kind of sane approach to getting more affordable housing. And the only way to change that is to take away some of the power that I think big real estate has. So I think that's the right conversation. And I think it is infinitely doable, particularly if we populate our community boards truly with people who are empowered by their leaders instead of empowered to do their leaders' bidding, which is what it is like now. And that's why I'm doing this job. It's so important to do that work. That is where the work is.
Thank you very much. We'll go next now to State Senator Hoylman, if you're there. Okay, there you are. Same question about how do you balance engagement, community engagement, especially in housing, with the need for lots of types of housing in Manhattan? Oh.
We need to build, and I appreciate the question, but we need to build affordable and supportive. And community boards are that engagement component. That's why we need to have planners on boards. That's why we need to have project by project, whether these proposals by private developers are actually getting the public their money worth. Rachel, I was just on the floor of the Senate voting against a proposal that Governor Cuomo has to subsidize 20 million square feet of commercial office space in Midtown Manhattan at the tune of $1.3 billion. There is no thought in that plan of affordable or supportive housing. And the taxpayers, us, are subsidizing to the tune of over $1 billion. Well, I think the borough president, and I think any interested New Yorker has to fight giveaways like that to developers. Certainly, the borough president can speak out against those kind of giveaways. Certainly, the borough president can go to Albany and fight for more supportive and affordable funding for NYCHAS, which is, at a historic low and embarrassment to all levels of government. And then finally, it comes down to the fact that every neighborhood has to take its fair share of affordability. I believe that strongly, and we've had certain neighborhoods that have, taken most of it. That's got to change, but it's got to change in a conversational way with our community boards, and that means planning at the local level with the assistance of the borough president. I believe in ground-up planning, not top-down, and certainly not dictated by the market or by real estate.
Okay, thank you very much. Cam Watkins, same question to you about engagement versus, getting things done, getting projects built.
Yeah, that's a tough one because as my colleagues have pointed out, the balance between what the conversations at the local level relative to the power at the governor's level, at the mayor's level, and ultimately with the real estate developers themselves is like a uranium nucleus. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to split that open and figure out how to get in there and make changes for people. Some of the work that I've seen that seems to be has the most promise has to do with repurposing a lot of the vacated space that we have in Manhattan. I think Senator Hoylman has talked about this a couple of times. I think we're all racking our brains to try to figure out how to make sure that we have enough units in Manhattan for all levels of income, including supportive housing and public housing, and the processes that we have in place are simply not set up in order for that mechanism to move and center the people that actually benefit from that. It's incredibly frustrating. I think one of the things that I would really like to tinker with is the makeup of our community boards, where I have found in some of our neighborhoods, the community board is really adept at sort of navigating these conversations and engaging really well and making sure that voices are heard in the conversations. And then in other neighborhoods, that really is a struggle. And so I don't know exactly what the answer is. One of the things that I've talked about, because I've heard many students talk about this, is why is it that we're not electing some of our community boards? Why aren't we actually getting to democracy at the neighborhood level so that we can bring people into conversations that have a real vested interest in doing work for people instead of being the sort of greased wheel with the mechanisms of the government.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go to Councilmember Levine now, and I'll just go back to the original question from the student just to refresh our memory. I know I made it a land use question, but the question was, how do you plan to involve residents in the decision-making process in our borough? And my complication of that is without stopping things completely, projects that need to get done. So go ahead, Councilmember Levine.
Thank you so much for your framing and for all three of the students who asked these questions. But we have multiple imperatives right now. We have an affordable housing emergency, which is first and foremost impacting people at the lowest rung of the economic ladder, including those who are a step away from homelessness, but also people who are working class, who are struggling to find housing as well. We have the imperative to start growing again for our economy, for the jobs that are on the line. We have the imperative to preserve the integrity of neighborhoods, the livability of neighborhoods of this borough and city. And I have proven that I can win on every one of those fronts. I have won some epic battles against real estate in the legislative arena, as I mentioned, by passing right to counsel for tenants in housing court. In the land use arena, I created a new historic district in my district in Morningside Heights, preserving 115 buildings in perpetuity, an extremely complicated fight. I have built hundreds of units of affordable housing, including a project on the west side on 108th Street that faced fierce opposition, but I pulled it off. It's almost done. It's going to be over 200 units of supportive housing and an expanded homeless shelter. And what I'm doing now in the proposed rezoning in Morningside Heights, I think really proves my vision of involving the community to meet these different goals, to get the right balance. We have a community-led coalition partnering with the community board that is in the final stages of a proposal for Morningside Heights that would put height caps on to prevent the kind of wildly out of scale luxury towers we're seeing mid-block in the neighborhood, but also would expand density on the avenues and even more so next to subway stops so that we can capture affordability. And that is proof of my vision, a balanced view of land use that meets these multiple needs, that centers the community, and that can achieve real wins for Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, same question to you.
All right, thank you for the question. It's a big one. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, a big piece of the borough president's job is dealing with land use issues. And as a longtime community board chair, we sat through endless meetings working on these issues in my neighborhood. What I'm really good at is when I don't know the answer to a question, I almost always know the person who does. And I think whoever's elected to this office needs to have that skill set. This is a job and this is a position, and the issues related to land use and zoning and housing are critical to the borough presidents. So we need somebody first and foremost who is going to use good judgment to propose changes. And I think we can all agree on this call that there need to be changes to the zoning and land use process, what we call ULURP, the Universal Land Use Review Procedure. And if any of you students have studied that, you've studied more than I did when I was in college. It's a big piece of what the borough president is going to have to be responsible for. Also, in who we make appointments for. Appointments to the City Planning Commission, and as has already been addressed, to community boards. I have done that for the better part of a decade. As borough president, you really need to marshal all the tools you have available. We need to be leveraging technology. We need to limit the scope of as of right developments, and we need to empower the community however we can to really have a voice in a way that hasn't been done yet. So again, I pledge as Community Board 7, as I did as Community Board 7 chair, to appoint community boards that go further. I appointed made the first public housing task force, and not just the public housing task force where we had somebody just for the sake of doing, but where we actually got things done. We have 2 public housing developments in our neighborhood on the Upper West Side. We not only put those individuals who are from NYCHA on the board, we put them in positions of leadership, which is something that's very critically important. The borough president also sets global and local priorities for the city. She is going to set a vision for the borough that's home to 1.6 million residents, renowned parks and universities. We need to make sure that whoever is elected to this position has the leadership to make these responsible land use decisions. And again, development's never going to end in the city. It has to be more rational. So I care about public spaces. I care about making sure we have clean air, that we are being equitable and responsible and caring about the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and lastly, we'll hear from Councilmember Ben Kallos. Same question.
I've been waiting for this question. I've spent most of my life and this pandemic as a tenant in a market rate 1-bedroom apartment with my wife, daughter. You all know Pandora by now, and we had our landlord spike our rent and force us out during a difficult high-risk pregnancy. And I can tell you firsthand that even with thousands of vacant apartments, people saying the city is dead, Manhattan still has an affordable housing crisis. If you've seen Rounders, you know that if you're sitting at a table and you can't spot the sucker, then it's you. Developers get billions in tax breaks for affordable housing that never materializes. Corrupt politicians get thousands in campaign contributions, and tenants like us, we pay for it all. That's why when I ran for city council, I refused big real estate, developer money, corporation money, lobbyist money. Then I wrote the law so more progressive candidates could run the right way and win. I wrote the law to get hundreds of thousands of affordable homes back on the market, and you can find hundreds of them right now at housingconnect.nyc.gov. I'm the only candidate in this race who has supported a community-led rezoning and won. that stopped Billionaires Row in its tracks at residential neighborhoods, then used the momentum alongside Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer to stop buildings for billionaires that would rather build empty voids than affordable housing. When it comes to local control, we need a corrupt Albany legislature to repeal the Erstat law so that New York City can actually control its own rent laws. Right here on the Upper East Side, I built or preserved over 1,000 units of affordable housing, including housing for formerly homeless women and children 2 blocks from where I live. And I have a plan to end family homelessness by renting vacant apartments now, and it would save taxpayer money. I yield my time.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so speaking of time, we're getting, 15 minutes to the end here, and I'm worried about cutting into closing statement time, but I do want to get to one more student question, which is about healthcare and the health system in this city. We'll start with State Senator Brad Hoylman for the answer to this question when I read it. So this is from Yastina Gergis, who is a sophomore and who is studying biology and pursuing a human rights certificate. And Yastina says, no one needs to be told that New York City was the epicenter of the pandemic. How will you work to fortify our healthcare system to better and equitably serve our people, as well as prepare for any future widespread outbreaks of COVID or other infectious diseases? And I'll just add to that, which is within the scope of the Manhattan Borough President's Office. So State Senator Hoylman, and I'll just say, let's do 1 minute for this so we can wrap up on time. So 1 minute on that question. Thank you.
It's a great question, Stina. Couldn't be more pressing. I would
State Senator, I think that you might need to, let's stop for now, and I'm going to move on to the next person because you're breaking up pretty badly. If you could, I'm really not getting much sound from you.
For school children to get vaccines in New York, I passed a bill that allows you to get a vaccination.
I think I can hear you now, if you can start over again.
Okay, I'm here.
Yep, okay.
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, if you could just
I'm here now.
start over
I'm so
again.
sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Yastina. Just, I would say, look at my record, look at all of our records. I think an indication of what we're going to do is what we've done. I passed legislation that requires, I would say, to look at our records and see what we've done to predict what we will do. I think that's very important. Yastina, I passed legislation that requires school-aged children to get vaccines in New York. I did that 2 years ago before we knew what COVID was because of the outbreak of measles. I passed legislation that allows you to get a vaccine at your pharmacy. That's so important. And I've been a co-sponsor system in the state of New York. I'll continue to fight that. But as borough president, the role will be different, admittedly. While I'll be able to introduce legislation, the kind of things I'll be fighting for are school-based health centers, which is so important that we have that central organizing force for our school kids. And it's a necessity. It's something that's top on my list. And we need the funding to do it. We need the role in Albany and the relationships there to get that done. Thank you.
You're muted, Rachel.
Thank you very much. Kim, you're on it. You got the order down. So next question, that same question to you. And you've got 1 minute on the clock.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So, I think that the underlying theme really about what's going to happen with public health in New York City has to start with planning for what the public health future is going to look like under conditions that we don't necessarily understand all that well right now. And we really do need to look to the way that we suffered from a lack of planning as a function of what we've been through over the last year. The data that we have in our city should have helped us better prepare for the response that we needed to the pandemic. And we responded too late. I mean, bottom line. So what the borough president needs to do is to really convene a task force that puts together plans. I like Senator Hoylman's idea of the school-based health clinics, but I actually prefer full-time salaried nurses in each of our schools as a function of making sure that all of our kids and that community centers have the resources that they need, especially in the communities that have suffered the most this year.
Thank you. Councilmember Levine, same question about health equity and our
Thank you so much, Rachel. This must be our moment to at last address the profound inequality in healthcare that has been revealed and exacerbated over this past year. I will use every lever of the Office of Borough President to organize to achieve this, to ensure that every New Yorker, including undocumented New Yorkers, has access to primary care. I'm working on legislation today that would guarantee that they have access to a community clinic in every neighborhood for primary care, whether or not they qualify for health insurance or not. We need to once and for all address the documented levels of racism in the way medical care is delivered in this city, where bias has resulted in such unconscionable results as an 8-to-1 ratio of maternal fatalities for Black women versus white women in this city. And we need to double down in investment of our public hospital system, which is so grossly underfunded relative to well-funded private systems, and again, was a major source of inequality in this pandemic. I will fight to fix that and to take on this challenge as borough president.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you can go ahead with 1 minute.
Sure. So again, the borough president really needs to be act as a local leader on issues related to that bully pulpit, right? Neighborhood by neighborhood. We've all seen firsthand over the last year the inequities in the system. We've seen it when it's come to PPE delivery. We've seen it when it comes to testing. We've seen it when it's come to vaccine distribution and equity. There's a lot of blame to go around, but there clearly has not been enough from our local leaders that have made that happen and gotten it done. And we need a leader who's going to get it done. That's what I've done throughout my career. I want to also address, since we're at Roosevelt House, the importance of being there with women, the wage gap, the women of color gap, the importance of how many women have not had the chance to get the healthcare they deserve in this city over the years. And whoever is borough president needs to make that a major focus. So whether it's healthcare, environmental injustice, air quality, those are all things in the healthcare system that whoever is borough president needs to prioritize. And again, going back to where I'm going to base my office, which is at 125th Street for the borough president, it's going to be critical to my office and my focus as borough president. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Kalos, same question to you.
I support Medicare for all, and let me tell you why. In 2012, I had severe stomach pains for a week. I finally paid the $50 for a visit to urgent care, and the doctor there told me I had an appendicitis and I needed to get operated on immediately. That appendectomy and the subsequent hospitalization cost me $30,000. Even after insurance, it still took me 5 years to pay off the cost of that visit. I had the privilege of healthcare. For many, an experience like that would have put them in debt for even longer and perhaps even bankrupted them. In a country and city of billionaires, that should not be in the case. In January, I had surgery without the anesthesia my doctor recommended because my insurance wouldn't cover it. Healthcare should be a human right and dictated by doctors, not insurance companies. This pandemic has shown us that we are all in this together. With that, testing and vaccines all need to be free regardless of status. We need a healthcare system where every New Yorker has comprehensive coverage with equality of care regardless of race, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we'll hear from Lindsay Boylan on the same question about health equity in New York.
Sure. So common refrain, people closest to the pain should be closest to the solution. You mentioned that this should be answered in the vein of what person on the job can do as borough president, which is about land use and zoning. And what we find and what we found in this cascading effect of inequality is people who have instability in housing have the poorest outcomes in health. People who don't have stable caregiving opportunities, don't have real access to paid leave, are the ones who are suffering the most. That's why it's so important funding excluded workers at the state level. That is going to be the priority for me. Every resource that I have as borough president is going to be directed to the people who need the assistance the most. And the only thing I'd add, and I want to agree with Elizabeth on the decades we've set women back in this crisis, is we also need to think about mental health, because we have a current pandemic. We have a mental health pandemic that is overlapping, and we're barely scratching the surface of it as well. And we have to think of mental health as much in the same vein and importance as we do physical health.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to closing statements, and I really appreciate that we have 120 people who are still in this Zoom on a Tuesday night listening to this and engaging, and I just absolutely love that. So thank you to everyone who's still watching. So 1 minute for closing statements, and we will go in the reverse of what we started with. So we will start with State Senator Hoylman. What's your pitch to the folks listening of why you should be the president?
Well, how about universal Wi-Fi? That would be good, based on my problems tonight. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman. I think the best indication of what someone's going to do in the future is what they've really done in the past. And just to let you know, I've passed over 100 bills in Albany, ranging from ensuring that we have fair policing to the first pause on evictions during the pandemic, the New York State Tenant Safe Harbor Act that stops folks from getting evicted, to making certain that LGBTQ people are protected. I passed the law that gives human rights protections to transgender and in so-called LGBTQ conversion therapy. I'd be the first gay borough president, the first gay dad. I'm really proud of that fact. I have 2 daughters, and I believe that public education and public higher education is really the future of our economy. You know, there have been more New Yorkers that have made it to the middle class through CUNY than all of the Ivy Leagues combined. And I'm proud that we've been fighting to close the tap gap up here in Albany, but we have to provide more resources to our CUNYs. I just want to give a shout out to Diana and Labiba, 2 of my campaign fellows who are CUNY students right now. We really appreciate their work. I hope you go to my website, bradhoylman.com. Look at my Marshall Plan for Manhattan. Look at my record. Understand that this is a formative moment for all New Yorkers. Get involved in campaigns, no matter what you choose, and ranked choice voting. You know, if we're not your first choice, maybe we'll be your second or even third. But we all have to fight for the future of the city. We can't hand it over to the special interests that have ruled City Hall for so many years. We need a borough president that's engaged, that's experienced, and that's really to fight in the trenches with Manhattanites. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. Lindsay Boylan, we'll hear from you.
Your generation, all the listeners on this call are going to have to deal with the climate crisis and the massive inequality. And yet you're not represented in every level of government. You're not represented at the resourcing of responding to these problems. And I think what we see is it's not just representation that matters, it's also courageous leadership. I've taken on the most powerful men in this state. I've taken on big challenges, leading the state's recovery work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. I've taken on being a mom to this young daughter in the city. And this would be the great honor of my life, to help our borough and our city recover after this crisis, and to do it in a way that respects people who've suffered the most. And that is the whole goal of government. And it takes courageous leadership to do that. And I think my experience recently is that there are far too few people are willing to have that courageous leadership. And so it would be the great honor of my life, and I'm excited to do the job and work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Kallos.
I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because anywhere else in America, people struggle to get out. But here in New York City, people struggle to stay. And together, I believe we can fix that. Together, we can build a Manhattan that is affordable, a Manhattan that is equitable. I believe that this year we can elect a new city council and Manhattan Borough President who haven't been corrupted by real estate, corporate, and lobbyist money. We can prioritize a worker-led recovery from this pandemic. We can achieve real racial, economic, environmental, and criminal justice. I'm proud to have the endorsement of our Congresswoman, Carol Maloney, as well as 78 labor unions, from our nurses to construction workers to bus drivers, and I hope to have your endorsement as well. Please join our team at kalos.nyc to fight for a city where we no longer have to struggle to stay. We can win a city for all of us, where everyone plays by the same rules. I'll yield my time.
Thank you. Elizabeth Caputo.
Excellent. Am I still on? Okay,
Yes,
great.
you are.
So look, I'm all in for Manhattan. I'm so excited about this. I've been so excited about this campaign. I believe now more than ever, our city and our borough need qualified new executive leadership to move this city and this borough forward. I build bridges for a living. I've spent 25 years living and working here. And that involves doing everything from working in municipal finance to chairing my local community board, to running an actual citywide grassroots young professionals organization that I think everyone on this call has been involved in at some point, where we hosted a bunch of events even at Hunter College 12 years ago on the future of publication. So as borough president, I'm going to work harder and better to tackle some of these really big issues: affordable housing, transit, sanitation, our public schools, bringing back our restaurants and nightlife. And we need to bring back our economy. We have an opportunity, as I've said all along, to make Manhattan even stronger. I've consistently believed that our greatest strength is in the energy and the diversity of its people. And I'm ready to channel that experience to be your champion for the city and the borough we all love. I'm at elizabethcaputo.com and look forward to staying in touch with all of you. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Have a great night.
Thank you. Councilmember Levine.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Brevemente en español, quería comentar que no importa el idioma que ustedes hablen ni dónde hayan nacido, seguiré luchando por usted, al igual que he hecho durante toda mi carrera. I'm running for borough president now to help Manhattan come back from this multi-front crisis, a public health crisis, an economic shock, a crisis of inequality. This is a cause I've devoted my entire adult life to, from my days as a science teacher in the South Bronx to my tenure now as chair of the City Council Health Committee, fighting this pandemic, standing up for science and equity and empathy. And these are the causes I will fight for, organize for, and deliver on as your next borough president. And I'm so glad that the Roosevelt Institute and all of you as students have hosted us tonight. And I want you to get involved in these campaigns. We need you now. We need your voice. We need your energy. We need your new ideas, your vision, your leadership. This is the moment for you to step into the arena to help shape the future of Manhattan and New York City. And I couldn't be more excited to have you leading. Thank you so much again. Thank you, Rachel, for your great moderation as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And lastly, we'll hear from Kim Watkins.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you all students. The questions have been so incredibly thoughtful, and I'm just so appreciative of the input and the conversation tonight. Listen, I'm running for borough president because I'm angry. You know, you don't run for elected office because you're comfy and you're thinking everything's going well. You run because you have a frustration, and mine has been centered around the public school system. We spend tens of millions of dollars on high stakes tests, but we can't afford permanent full-time school nurses in our schools. We're putting more than $100 million in a floating island on the Hudson, but we can't afford to make sure the elevators work in our NYCHA buildings. Two examples that barely scratch the surface of the injustices, the structural racism and the injustices that regular New Yorkers have faced under years of complacent leadership and neglect. My background with both private companies and public service is exactly what we need right now. Diverse teams of people doing the work with our communities. I believe that the vibrancy of our neighborhoods and the future of our city is directly related to the strength of our public school system. That is why I've centered the public school system in my platform. And I'd be honored to have your support as your next borough president. You can find me at runwithkim.com. And thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. And thank you to all the candidates. This was really great. I hope that everyone watching got something out of it. I want to thank everyone at the Roosevelt House at Hunter College. It was really quite an easy event to be a part of because you guys did such a good job. So thank you. And again, I just want to plug what I do, which is I'm a reporter at The City, a nonprofit and independent newsroom. We're at thecity.nyc. If you haven't heard of us, please read us. We try so hard to bring you what you need to know in New York. So thank you. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you for being a part of this.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.